We leave the buffer in front. Turn away from the camera. Magic reveal. It's episode, don't say it, this is episode 14. Just like in an elevator, when you're going up and you're like, I'm on the 13th. Don't say it. There's no 13th floor on this elevator, sir. Welcome to episode 13 of HAX Camp Uncode. I am your host, the Mad Hatter, BTO Pro. Joined this week by a whole lot of awesome with Nikki, Michael Potter, Robert, Alice, Andrew, and we even have a special guest who's new to the show who's going to ask some questions about HAX for whatever reason that is. But anyway, Rob has internet this week, so he's going to kick us off to learn about Cypress. So you've been doing some investigation of Cypress, Rob, huh?
Yep, and I have internet this time, as you said, so now I can actually display it on screen. Everyone can see what I've been looking at.
Awesome. Well, you should be able to control. Take it away.
Yep, just click screen. There we go. Okay, do you see all of my PowerShell windows?
Yes.
I need to get an IDE on this, but this is how I'm showing the code for now. So to start off here, this window up here, I have a web component running somewhere. Here it is. This is going to be the one I'll be using during my demo portion of Cypress. So first I want to talk about actually opening up the GUI version. So if I go here to yarn run Cypress open, it'll take a second, but you'll see right here the GUI will appear.
And the address for this is cypress.io, is that correct?
Yep, that's where I got it from. Okay, so here's the GUI version of it. So straight away you can see I have a ElmsLN test that's for the ElmsLN website. Then here's all of the base examples that it came with. And then down here was my attempt for testing a web component. So first I'm going to start with this one right here, webtest.js. So first off, how you make these, they're simply just JSON files. You write them with whatever IDE you want, and then just save them in the Cypress integrations folder. So that's what I have right here. You can see all the same stuff. So already that's pretty open. And then to run them, it'll probably show up on my other screen, so I'll have to drag it across. But yeah, it did. There's the testing window. So it's going to go straight to the ElmsLN site and then just go through and test a whole bunch of pages. So that went by fairly quick. And when it's done, it doesn't actually close like how Selenium did. It stays open, so you can actually go through each step and view what it's looking for. So you see here, for instance, it's asserting that the URL has /demos in it, which you can see on screen right here it does. I have to keep my mouse over it so you can tell. And every single step from start to finish, you can just reel your way back and view it. So it didn't happen in this instance, but say you have a failed assertion, you can go back to the failed assertion and visibly see why it's failing. And it also, if you have a failed assertion, it'll actually keep going past it and test everything else as you have it written. So it's not that's a lot of stuff it does that Selenium doesn't, because in Selenium, as soon as it fails, it just closes and says test completely failed. Whereas this, it says this % of tests have passed.
Yeah, I already love this then.
Yeah.
By comparison.
Exactly. So I'm going to close out of that one. I'm going to run the web component one because this is a more experimental one. It took me a while to figure this out, but I did find a YouTube video that demonstrated how to do this. You can get it to interact with web components. So as you see, it was fairly fast, but I'll pull up the web component again. As you can see, I didn't touch this one. And every time you click increment, the number goes up. So the fact that this went up to 6 tells me it did actually reach the button and click it. And Cypress even says that it managed to get through that, because also, as you see, as I go up, it goes back to 5. So that's sort of the experimental portion. Now, one more thing I want to demonstrate is running it in headless mode. So I'm going to first minimize this. Before I get to the headless mode, I'm going to close that and talk about the code here. So this one up here is the elmsln.org test that I have. So this is, again, how I have it written is in Nano. I should be probably using a better IDE than that. But you can see here, it'll search for a button that has examples on it and then click it. And then it checks the URL to see if it includes /examples. And it does that for several pages. And then the experimental one is down here. This is the one to actually get through Shadow DOM and access your web component. Now, I can link the YouTube video after I'm done speaking here, but how the guy was describing it in the YouTube video, he said, first you have to find your web component directly, which is what this does. Then you have to essentially state, or maybe not state, declare like the DOM variable, then use like DOM shadow root query selector to find, in my case, a button and click it. In his case, he was looking for a text box to type in. I think it was just "Hey Duke" is what he typed in. So it's just a single step that I have here now. What I'm trying to find out is getting multiple steps in one component using this method, which I think could be possible, but I got to practice this more. So going back to this, so I'm going to now show running it in headless mode. So this command that I have here, I'll scroll down so it's at the top of my window. This command right here is how I've been running Cypress via command line. If you just run npx cypress run, it'll run all of your tests in the integrations folder, and it'll all be in Electron headless. So for the sake of this demonstration, I only chose the webtest.js, so it goes by a little faster. Take a second to run, but you'll see it say Electron headless mode.
Oh, so that UI is just written in Electron, I guess.
Yeah.
Nice. I really liked in that test syntax that really, it was less about getting at the shadow root and more just probably having to figure out how to access the DOM in general.
Yeah,
At
that's
which point we can just write normal, JavaScript calls. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's what I'm running into right now, is just kind of figuring that out. And as you saw, it ran the same test and it all passed. And then the other thing that I tried this before I joined here, this will be the last kind of thing I share, is you'll see this Electron thing here that's from the web component that I was using. That was me trying to run this, the test for this in headless mode. So that one I also kind of need to debug a little bit more. But I know that the headless mode at least works, period, because you just saw it run for the elmsln website. So that's kind of where I am with Cypress. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it looks, I saw them on Twitter talking about their, they have support for Shadow DOM. So I don't know, like, and that just happened within the past few days.
Oh, really?
It says experimental support for Shadow DOM. And then
Yeah, I
they
also
point-
saw a plugin.
Okay, all right, maybe that was it.
Yeah, I didn't explore it enough, but that's another link I can go find. Is there was like a plugin that I saw on an NPM website for Shadow DOM.
Okay, nice. Yeah, because it looks like they, in these examples, I'm going to post this in the chat. Maybe you can pull that up real quick. If you can click on it, if it allows you to click on it.
Yeah,
But it looks like very similar syntax, but they now have like a shadow function.
Right there.
Yeah, this is a little different than what I saw when I was looking at the plugins on that NPM website. On there, it had stuff like shadow find, shadow get.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because if it worked with what you had rigged up, Rob, I don't know if I would want to use Cypress specific syntax of, hey, go find this thing in Shadow versus like just writing the actual JavaScript as we normally would. I mean, I honestly have a preference. I wonder how often we actually need to dig down through shadow roots to click buttons.
Well,
Maybe it's more than I'm
concept.
thinking, but yeah, no, I mean, that I think it looks great. I like the feature set more than what I had previously done messing around with Selenium. So, I mean, one, the syntax is way cleaner than when we last tried to write tests. And then the fact that it's just running Electron headlessly, that's nice to be able to fire it up either in UI mode like you had, which with one or two tests is not a big deal. But, you know, if we end up creating a huge test suite, some of which are generalized test bed things and others that are very, you know, specific, like something with a lot of sophistication, such as the simple fields work that we've done, we probably want some half decent tests that verify, hey, when you pass in this schema, you actually get, you know, 10 form fields or whatever. It'll become unmanageable if we don't have a UI, given that we have 220 some odd repos.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I remember when this first came up, that was a couple episodes ago, Nikki, Cassandra threw out the idea of aligning these tests with the storybook.
Yeah, I believe she did mention something related to that, especially. So I know, you know, I'm looking at the OpenWC stuff, like the integration between the documentation and the custom elements JSON was a thing. And our HAX scheme is a bit more robust than that. So it would be kind of cool to tie all of that stuff together in a way to be able to run tests.
I wonder if you at least could get some baseline level assertions automated, like verify that the defaults that are in constructor for default text are equal to what they should be in the DOM or something. I'm just not sure how much you could actually automate the tests relative to the, you know, custom element JSON and the storybook. I get the custom element JSON and storybook, that there could be a lot of synergy there, but
I think when you think about what the different property values are, if you know what the data type is, and
that's true.
You know, we can play around with each data type of each property and play around with slots.
That is true.
And that's, you know, yeah, which is kind of what I was tinkering around with Storybook anyway, was, you know, it was just sort of generating random values in some of the Storybook components.
Yeah, so maybe coupled with something like that, with knowing what the random value is and then asserting that the random value shows up in the right place or something.
Yeah. If only we were going to be talking about schemas later on in the episode.
That's unfortunate, but we're going to have to detour for a bit. So last week we had to bump Alice because we ran over time. But Alice was going to give us some feedback on HAX.psu, namely the areas where it sucks. Long pause. So, I mean, has room for improvement. Now, hopefully it's better than last week even, because Nikki and I had a call earlier this week about areas where it sucked. And I've already pushed out some changes to the CDN. So, Alice, you have something you wanted to share with us, feedback land?
Sure. Was I on that call where we talked about things that sucked?
Nope. No, it was internal to where Nikki and I work. It was with some of our core user base.
Cool. All right. I'll go ahead and share my stuff. I can figure out how to do that as always. All right, cool. So this is a website I started to build in hax.psu.edu, and the idea was to do a UI UX teardown and maybe start highlighting some of the web components that could be used for, you know, really cool educational purposes. So looking here at the editing interface, I just very quickly kind of go through what I saw as soon as I started the interface and my process that I went through as I pulled up the site and went to edit my first page There's like, okay, cool, the toolbar just went away. We have this left-hand sidebar. I need to add content. I want to add content. And so how about a styled image? That seems like a good idea. All right, so I go to Wikimedia. I find a taro leaf. Cool, cool. I figure out how to, put stuff in. So there's two different places here. I note that you can add a URL. That was a little confusing to me. Maybe I'm just easily confused. And I go through the different ways that you can configure the image. So here's my Wikimedia link here under the styled image settings. The alt text I added around image thing, which is just part of this, this particular web component style you can add. And I go over the different tabs here, the layout, configure, and advanced tab. I actually started going through some other HAX sites that had discussed the UI, and a lot of them suggested that maybe configure should be the default tab. Not a big deal, but again, there's only like 2 settings here on the layout. Maybe we could combine those. And then this advanced tab, which I just didn't really use at all. So that was just a quick overview of like the one-page get start type model, and the pedagogical perspective. So what types of educational affordances do web components offer? So there's this self-check web component, and you can, in theory, put images in here. I don't, but basically, if I were to ask myself, what color are apples? I could review my notes and be like, oh, they're red, and then self-check, and yeah, a little confusing considering that the background there is green, but we'll not get into that. And the multiple choice thing, perhaps I want this to be a multiple choice option. I only have one answer here. It's yellow, but could add more. So stop note. Suppose, yeah, you want your students to stop and read chapter 2 before proceeding. This chapter contains important information. Or, stop and go fill out your discussion form after reading this. So that can be useful in that situation, and we have timelines. So one of the really annoying things about for students is having to refer to multiple images at the same, multiple areas or images or text and images at the same time. That increases cognitive load on the students because they have to look at the page and then look at the image and page and image, and they have to try and keep that in their mind at the same time. One of the nice things here is that we have the text right next to the images. I might need to go back and add some alt text and stuff here. That is one thing I did note, is that while there's lots of really nice places to add things like, come back here. Where there's really nice places under styled images to add things like attributions, like Avenue at Wikimedia Commons here. I didn't see that in the timeline. Maybe it's there and I'm just not seeing it. But that was one piece of feedback I had. That, and sometimes this menu just does not want to work. I'm going to reload.
Yeah, I got to figure out what's up with your computer.
Yeah, it really is my computer as far as we can tell.
No,
except that
it's
it's not.
not.
It's the
Some
server.
Apache thing.
Yeah, I know that when I was meeting with Rebecca, that happened too.
Oh, okay, so it's not
Well, it must just be everyone's computer except mine. Works good on my screen.
Okay, and so that's as far as I've gotten. If you have any feedback or thoughts about what types of web components you'd like me to explore as far as their use as an educational resource, please let me know, and I can try and add that to this page. So
for starters, it's some Apache issue. I'm not, it's clearly not your computer. Some configuration with what we need to do there, because that doesn't happen in local development at all. But I like that you're implementing the different elements and then kind of placing an explanation as to what goes with that. That's in part what the feedback that we talked with our team on, that was yesterday, about, is them implementing these tags for educational purposes and then coming up with, here's what worked well, how do we fix this, how do we make this thing lay out and look better. So we're definitely at that level of what needs done. What I think would be really useful in assembling that, Alice, is if there was some way of explaining this to other instructional designers, like, look, these are some examples of instructional components in context. Here is what actually makes up one of these. I'm not saying, hey, go build it. I'm saying this is something you can take to an engineer or a programmer to have crafted for you. And what we've created is more the vehicle for creating these little sustainable bricks.
Okay, so more like these are the elements of the web component that I'm using, and this is why they're useful, and a little bit less about the UI.
I mean, because the UI is variable. I'm not saying that the UI side isn't important, just something, and I mean, this is totally open for discussion. I don't know how best to communicate to an instructional design audience. Hey, yeah, I know you like that one feature of H5P. How about this thing? Okay, I know you like this idea of a thing. We are creating the vehicle for that to happen. Like, let's get contribution and buy-in on that one little
He's
thing.
basically saying that what you provide, Alice, is something that not everybody can for us in that designer speak, and why this might be better than an H5P for a route to go as well. The other stuff is useful, but I think the angle, if I'm correct, Brian, is that this is something that only the people on the ed side who have that background can really communicate to the people on the ed side.
Yeah, and I wasn't suggesting the other stuff isn't useful. Thank you, Nikki, for clarifying. It's just that why, almost like answering the question, well, why this over H5P? Or like, why would I bother doing this? Especially given an audience who has recreated form options in a dozen different systems over the last 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, yeah, no, I'll definitely think about some ways to explain that to an educational audience.
Can I start calling you the instructional designer whisperer?
If you want.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Alex. If you come up with issues, even that like, hey, I clicked the thing after doing this and didn't reload, please throw those in our issue queue.
Okay,
so we have them quantified. Yeah. Awesome. So Potter, you want to show some work you did with unbundled builds and building a UI for it?
Yeah.
Sick.
So this is something that we talk about a lot on the show, and it is unbundled builds. And what we mean by that is how we are approaching packaging up all of our web components to deploy them to either one website, but more likely a group of websites. This is different than a lot of what the community does, which is whenever you're working on a project, it is just one project. That one project has its dependencies. And what we do is we have build tools that take that tree shake all of those dependencies, all of those web components, and package them up, smush them together in compressed files, in chunked files. And those files are specific to one website, this one project. And that's a totally valid way of approaching packaging your dependencies, your web components. We feel that unbundled web components is a different approach, and it has some benefits that bundling, as I previously described, does not give you. One of the challenges is that it does require some tooling that is not currently out there. So what we've done is, what Brian did is put together unbundled web components. This is a repo that's on the ELMS-LN organization on GitHub. And it is a template for how you can build your assets in your projects. So what it is the top layer of this is the tooling. So this is what's described in the top layer here is how you can generate your unbundled builds. And the app layer is a template for what your web components, how they could be structured. So basically you have a source directory, and this is where you work out of. So whenever you're creating new components, you're importing them into this app.js. If you want to add dependencies, the process would be adding them to your package.json. Let's say that we want to add the HAX tag to our project. We'd add those through the template.json. We'd install it in this directory, in this app directory, using npm or yarn. And then we would run a command that would generate a build. And that build would be in here. So it's this build command. So what this build command does is it leverages the Polymer CLI. So not Polymer, the library, but actually the CLI. And what that does is it allows us to bundle them together in the unbundled web component approach. And then it runs some cursors to optimize those for ES6 and AMD and all of the, to hit all the browser support. So it's quite a few steps. So what we're trying to do to make that easier is to put that into a CLI. So what I did was I actually, and I'm throwing this out to the group to see what everybody feels about this, but I think that this is a good place for this is actually the web component factory. So WC factory. I think this falls under the scope of that. So what I did is I made a new group of commands under WC factory called unbundled. So unbundled has at this point 2 commands. There's a generate, which will scaffold out that template for you that I just laid out here. And then the build function. So running that Polymer bundling function and running all the tersing and stuff like that. So what that gives you to the end user is this is what it could look like for how you use it. I'm gonna remove all these. All right, so this is, let's say that we're setting up a test website here, or we're setting up a new website, and I want to scaffold out a directory where I will work on my web components, where I will build my web components. So I'm going to use WC factory for that. So I'm going to run WCF. And one of the commands is unbundled. So I'm going to run unbundled. And then there are actually 2 subcommands under unbundled, one, the generate and the build. So I'm going to say generate. Right now, it doesn't ask you any questions. It just literally copies and pastes the scaffolding, the template that's right in here. In the future, we'll probably add some like, what's the name of the project? Do you have any additional dependencies? I'm not sure.
Well, you could also, since if we're I like the alignment with WCF on this. If we already have a factory, this could be the CDN shipping and delivery way of serving up your assets. So we could actually pre-populate that app/src/whatever.js with just import statements, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it could autocomplete. So some of the other commands that Brian's alluding to is if I want to create a new element, it's first going to ask me what factory would I like to create this element in. So WC factory has the connotation of managing multiple projects for you. So yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, so now that we have this scaffolded out, the potential workflow could be something like this. So I'm in my project. This has a source directory. Inside of the source directory, I have my app.js. So this is the top highest level import. So this is, tell me all of your web components that you want to import here. I just included this little fun HAX status web component that is an uptime status for HAX. So it could look like something like this. I could say, okay, well, in development, I'm going to use ESDev server. And what ESDev server does is it's tooling made by OpenWC to help you build web components quickly. So on the fly, it's doing all of the node resolutions for you. So if we, let's see here, HAX status. Let's see, where's it at? Where's it at? Where's it at? Oh, right. Nothing's installed. So you scaffold it out. Afterwards, run a yarn install so that you get your node modules. So now we have our node modules. Now I would run ESDev server. So here I am. I'm in my project. Oh, I do not want Spectrum at the moment. Okay, so maybe I would say in HAX status, maybe I add a title or something like that. Uptime. Save. It does automated refreshes. That looks all good. Okay, now I'm ready to bundle. I like where my assets are. I like HAX status. I'm going to bundle those for production. So I'd close out my development server and I would use WCF unbundled build to generate my production files. So this is, again, going to use the Polymer CLI, generate a few different bundles, one for ES6, one for ES6 AMD, one for really old browsers. It's going to optimize those with Terser. And after it is done, which should be just a few moments, we now have this dist directory with a build directory. We have the 3 different versions. If we inspect those, let's see what we get here. So we have our app.js. We have our HAX status, which you can see has been smushed down. And the node modules are resolving correctly. So this file right here, this dist file, is those are your unbundled components. So if you look on haxtheweb.org, you can see what this looks like in production. If we hit inspect, go to network and JS. So you can see all of the web components that are being loaded here. And if we click on one and take a look at the URL, we can see that it's in a directory called build, separated by the type of build, ES6, and then our node modules directory. So that's this is the exact tooling that we use to generate this unbundled build methodology.
So you're kind of combining the local development environment aspects of OpenWC with the build and tooling side of that. Is that correct? Is that accurate?
I'm not so much combining those. I was just showing an example of because I don't know if we want to be opinionated on how you do local development. I mean, we could, because there are a bunch of different ways to do local development. There's ESDev server, there's Parcel, there's a bunch of different tools. There's new tools coming out every day, and it seems to be by preference of developer, quite honestly. So this is just a way of
preferences.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, could you have like a preferences JSON file that, holds, what you're using for development, and maybe even also the components that you're going to be importing to help. Because sometimes you're going to unbundle the same shit over and over again, or a group of stuff while you're working on them. And it might be useful to just have a little, because I work on the video player a lot, just to be able to have a little config file that says, hey, when I run this, I'm running for video player and I am doing stuff with the SDev server.
I see.
Just a thought.
Yeah.
And maybe we can make some assumptions unless there's a config file that you add as a certain option.
Mm-hmm. So would that be an example of like an incremental build almost? I don't want to blow away everything, but I want to update just one component in my bundle, maybe. Or
Yeah, it could be for that, or it could be I'm grabbing an unbundled set of somebody else's components and I'm not actually going to fork it. I just happen to want my own local copies of a couple of them, but I don't want to.
Oh, I see.
So maybe I want some of the Everly stuff, but I don't want to make a fork.
Right.
I just need the unbundled versions. And if I'm doing that all the time and getting the latest versions, I might want a config file. And the reason I say this is because I spent a lot of time with the unbundled piece, doing the video player and a few things for Omeka for our museum. And I'd have to go back and do the unbundling of video player again and again because they did not want it. They didn't want to have it come directly from the CDN, so that it was a manual process to update, and they were warned.
Gotcha.
And so that's where I could see, if they start asking for more than just the video player, and now all of a sudden they're using 5 components, it would be nice to just have a config file that says, all right, when I run this thing, or maybe I add in, here's where you can find this config file, and then just be able to.
Yeah, absolutely.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does.
I mean, I feel like that config file is just package.json though, with the specific versions of things, right?
Yeah, you could.
Combined with app.js too.
True. So I wonder if I do like that this is unopinionated, but I know that we have an issue in our queue because Mike put it there for adding an app type of connotation to WC Factory and the way that the company is structured. So I wonder if it can be both. If there's kind of the abstraction and you could apply it to anything, and you can basically go into a folder and be like, hey, I want tooling added here for doing a build, and that there is the thing that's already, end to end of, hey, I'm starting to work on an app, like in Nikki's case with the Omeka project. Hey, I'm starting to work on this new project. Okay, just give me the boilerplate of a whole application development space that I can start messing with this.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense.
And the nice thing is it's really not that different. Hopefully it's just, stamping a couple other files with a different command.
Right.
And then running the next command.
Right.
So the other big change that we kind of skipped over, I totally forgot we even worked on this week, Mike, but is Nikki, when you previously used unbundled builds, everything was in one place. And now with what Mike went over initially, everything's kind of in an app folder. And then that's where you make all your changes, but you actually run the tooling from outside of that folder. And then at the end, it's always giving you another folder that you can just copy and paste that folder, and that it is only the stuff that goes in the other source.
That is really sweet.
Yeah.
So
gonna echo that. That's really sweet.
So then we could actually update the tooling aspect of how we go about executing these builds for when we improve them. Say we strip the comments out, or we have a better way of compiling them later on. and keep that abstracted from, oh, my project has these extra imports, and keep that abstracted from, oh, here's the thing that I'm actually shipping.
Yep.
So I am assuming that what you're showing, Mike, is basically only possible because we did that tee up work at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Easier.
Right. Yeah. So I will start a new branch on WC Factory. And if everybody's cool with the direction, we'll keep plugging away at it.
Solid. Love it.
Dope.
And there's none of that, make sure the file endings are .cjs or else we're not going to be able to work anymore. That's a much better branch than the one that I had to make for that garbage thing. So Greg, you had some questions about HAX. I know you showcased HAX all the things recently. We won't talk about where that is. But you had some questions about HAX in general, how it's storing data, things like that.
Yeah, so mostly Drupal 8 related. So I guess, how does HAX store basically what you're seeing on the screen? Like, where does it store in the database? What gets stored in the database? And then also, like, what's the HAX schema have to do with all of that?
So nice thing. I'll say the philosophy that we've taken with HAX is treating it basically the way that you would treat like a CK editor. So it is managing a body of content. It's going to give you an HTML data blob of some kind, which is, that's a Drupal agnostic thing, obviously. So that's how we end up getting these integrations into all different spaces. So the HAX all the things repo, which has some boilerplates in here, it actually has other boilerplates now as a result of me messing around this week. Although the Angular one just says, README, please contribute an Angular one, because I failed miserably. But so in Drupal 8, so that we're on the same page here, I would go to some piece of content, and this is a horrible boilerplate of one. Let me add another piece of content that's blank. Make it a blank page, stuff. All right, and I'm gonna make this full HTML because this side of the workflow certainly needs some love and automating. So the idea is that this is just managing the HTML of whatever this spot is. So if I were to go into block editor mode, I would brick my local demo right before showcasing is what it would appear. And get a whole bunch of backbone not defined errors. All right, I don't know what that's about. Let me see. Okay, so that part is loading. I don't know what the backbone not defined piece is. Maybe I'll have to go to my other one that's already running. But this is the HAX schema piece. Let me see if this one has editor show up. All right, I have no idea why that other page didn't have the editor show up with backbone JS errors in Drupal, but this would be among the reasons why I'm not a huge Drupal fan anymore. Anyway, so this is my test space with just all these things collapsing and whatnot. So every interaction that we're having with this is ultimately just generating HTML. So think of it as like a more advanced CK editor, with the fundamental difference being we never really want people to write plugins specific for HAX. Now, would we be open to that possibility? Absolutely. But if you want to extend HAX and make it, say, have some crazy 3-column item thing that can store different tags in it, you should be able to extend that body field as long as you're making web components. So all of those video players and all of these GIFs and everything down the page are still just IMG tags. The grid that is our layout piece, that is actually a tag called grid plate. So keeping that abstracted away from Drupal enables it in one piece so that this copy and paste can work somewhere else. An aspect that Mike didn't cover and why we do the unbundled build process, or how that's even possible, is we have a script that auto hydrates web components that it discovers. So by keeping those definitions unbundled, and we have 400 of them on a CDN or whatever, then any website that would implement basically copying and pasting a one-line build script that's part of what the output is that Mike was generating. Is there's a build.js file. So as long as you reference that build.js file, it's going to auto hydrate any web component it finds in the page. Now, to the the Angular React crowd and building a full application, obviously that's not the way you would do that, right? Those get integrated directly into the application. However, in a content management system where we have multiple content contributors effectively programming, I have air quotes for that part that's not recorded, programming the content and what their system is, the lazy hydration method allows them to be able to use a grid plate tag, or to use a meme maker or video player or self-check. And in the context of HAX, they have no idea that's what they're doing, hopefully. Like that's the idea, is that people don't go, oh, I really need a stop note tag. They just have a thing that's gonna have this stop sign that when they're making changes to it, they are, it won't let me access the camera because I'm on here, unfortunately. When they're making changes to it, they're fundamentally just interacting with this, witnessing what the changes are. Whoops, do this. And then when we're saving, so what I uploaded is actually just linked off to, right? So it uploaded this picture to the Drupal file entity system because I used the upload field through HAX, and then it just provided a link to it here. But this is still ultimately something that I could go into edit in CK editor in this place and see all of that HTML. So it is effectively data blobs, much like CK editor was. The fundamental difference from, say, a layout builder or anything that's in a Drupal specific context would be that's Drupal specific. So if we want to extend this, we build new web components. Now, when you say HAX schema, so we'll lead into that. Did you mean the way that we make elements and they talk to HAX, or what aspect of schema?
So like when you click the view source, you get the HAX schema, right? That was a question that we had, was what is the purpose of that, other than like just talking to the other components to tell them where, like how they work together, or what is that HAX schema for?
So do you mean when I hit view source that there's a button that says HAX schema?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That is purely for developer purposes, and I think I might have just turned off the developer mode with that. If I had it turned on, or if I enabled it, you just wouldn't see that button anymore. So okay, that's a good question. So let me go to here. So this is HTML. What HAX schema is, if I were to go to, well, you can see it visualized in part. So the content map is actually visualizing this now. So like this is skipping through the DOM and will jump me to the thing and highlight it. Well, this is just a representation of the page as HAX schema, is effectively how this map gets built. So view page source, I get my HTML, and this is what gets saved to the database, just to clarify. Now, if I hit this HAX schema button, which is almost vague on purpose and probably shouldn't even show up, to be honest, and I paste, this is a HAX element schema. So this is effectively how HAX is able to sanitize and represent the DOM. It is still HTML. It's saving back to properties at each step, so we can see, where's the more complex one? So like with grid plate, we see there's a lot of extra data that gets kicked out from that. But if I search for like video player, well, video player must be within a grid plate here. So self check. Nope, grid plate. There we go. All right. So that a grid plate is the tag grid plate, and then the properties that make it up. So it's basically just taking the HTML that's in the DOM and converting it into this light schema so that we can iterate over it and sanitize properties. So whenever something is added to the DOM, it's effectively being passed through this HAX element schema that just turns the HTML element into a tag, properties, and then content, and then reverse engineers that to spit it back out into the page. So it's ultimately always saving as HTML back into Drupal or any of the other sources.
So it's the sort of the workflow of how the schema gets in there is whenever you're creating the web component, you're first creating the visual aspects of the web component, right? And then the next process would be, well, how do you edit this component? So you would add HAX schema to each one of your properties. So if there's a title, if there's like a slot for a long description, those are two HAX properties, two HAX editable properties that you want your content contributors to edit. So you have to add those properties in your HAX schema field right here. Whenever you do that, HAX on the front end, whenever it loads those web components, they're going to see those HAX properties that are registered. So they're going to identify, okay, well, I know Meme Maker has these two properties that you can edit. So HAX is going to take a look at the HTML and derive the current properties that are there, the current values that are there, and convert those into HAX schema. So that way HAX knows how to give you these visual drag and drop, these visual text editors right in your browser.
Cool. That clears it up. So now this is an interesting one. If I go and change my web component outside of wherever and it's saved by CDN, how does Drupal like consume that? Does it consume the new one? Does it consume the old one? How does that process work?
So so basically we're treating the web components like they're normal HTML tags. So I would say it's more, maybe a way to think of it is this is statically saved and then hydrated on the fly based on that definition. So imagine that the IMG tag had no definition and the web didn't know what it was, and you could reprogram what the definition of an IMG tag was. And you could do that remotely via CDN, or you could do it via a local build, as long as there's something somewhere in the JavaScript execution that says window.customelements.define IMG and then passes a class to be able to say, hey, when you see an image, do this. So there's nothing in Drupal saying that a video player is gonna behave the way it does. It's entirely coming over the wire. So like this video player that's sitting here that I can hit play and it plays through and it's got a little YouTube pop-up thing. When this goes to load on the page in my horrific test bed here, I can do inspect, reload, it's not CSS, it's JS. And there is a video player tag being injected into the page that has that definition. That definition has been supplied in our case via this dynamic import registry script, which does the hydration, detecting this tag is used in the DOM and then importing just that definition. You don't have to do it that way to get these things to work. It's just from a performance standpoint, I'd say it's kind of like how Drupal is figuring out that you only use 12 JavaScript files on one page instead of another one you use 15. And so it packages up those 12 and ships them to you as a single thing. We're kind of compressing those 12 in place and then going, oh, you need a video player? Okay, the page is loading. Here you go. Here's this JavaScript for it. So this is kind of a double-edged sword here. So on the one hand, it's a good thing that you can ship a new definition of this video player in a sustainable way. So like Nikki worked with a group that didn't want to use whatever the university level video player is. Well, our HAX, the thing that Alice was showing earlier, she's using a copy of HAX CMS that's leveraging a single CDN that has the same definition of video player no matter who uses it. However, it is still just a JavaScript file. And so Nikki did a compile locally to have kind of an alternate copy of that. By telling her Omeka site to point to, local, I mean, you can see here it says, this is in sites, all libraries, web components, build / whatever. So by her pointing to basically taking that build directory, copying it to the server locally, and then that becomes the the build.js entry point. There we go. So this line right here is effectively the same everywhere. It's just, hey, there's a build file. And then that build file says, do a very basic test that we can do a dynamic import. If we can, then we know that we're successfully running an evergreen browser that can handle everything we're going to throw at it with an ES6 or newer version. And then it's going to load up this script that does the auto loading, which will then figure out everything else that is needed and effectively dynamically imports it. So if you needed to save into the DOM, or sorry, save into Drupal, like this is the way the video player looked today, and it always looks that way forever, that's not how this works. We're saving the abstraction and the semantic intention of whatever that thing is. Now, if you never change the definition of video player and you serve it from the site in question, well, then it stays the same. So it's I would say 180 degrees different from Gutenberg, which is taking whatever the plugin says that video player should be. It's written for Gutenberg, and then it's saving into the page stuff that is specific to that page operating. So I have seen.
I think that was the concern, that it wasn't working like Gutenberg. We just wanted to make sure that wasn't the case.
Yeah, that was a concern, or that's the. I'd be curious as to whether that's a good or a bad thing.
It's a good thing.
Okay.
In our research, Gutenberg already got shot down as an option. So, and that's because of how it saves its data, but HAX doesn't save it that way. So that's why this conversation's happening.
Okay. Yeah, that was, it's this stuff that like is so nuanced that you have to almost project and go, oh, well, we implemented some Gutenberg sites, or we implemented some CK editor sites or some layout builder, and then realize we do projects that are not going to ever touch those three things. So how do we have the team work on one video tag for all of our properties? It's a difficult problem space for a lot of people who are used to just app development. Or just used to Drupal development.
Yeah, like so it's coming from a Drupal development perspective, and we're saying, hey, we want to switch to web components. How to switch to web components? Okay, how do we leverage a way to build a page and not have to use layout builder or not have to use Gutenberg? So we're trying to figure out our editing experience, as well as trying to figure out, long term, like how does our front end work? How do content editors work with the sites? But yeah, so those were the kind of questions I had. And our last one is, I guess, we had some questions on how to customize the HAX UI, right, to fit clients' needs better, right? And how do we go about that? Or how does somebody go about that?
So ultimately, the HAX UI is just built out of a whole bunch of web components. So, and this is, inside baseball. Greg and I have known each other for several years. And I remember going to a bar with Greg, and he was like, this is the way people do React. And I said, but I had no experience with it. But now, after 5 minutes of integrating web components with React, I can successfully say I'm a React developer, and I will never venture back into that space. That being said, the HAX editing experience is all made out of web components. Part of the entire underlying philosophy of what that is outputting is that you could edit it with anything. So it's bizarre, but we do have things in CK editor that are highly specific. They're templates. They're things that our users are just used to. We actually have both editors. So we have people that use HAX because they like doing the block editing type of style of things. They want to use some more advanced elements. And then we have other people that still want to just use CK editor because that's what they're comfortable with. We're able to support both in Elms simultaneously because HAX is just outputting HTML. So with that said, the HAX UI and the HAX editing experience is pretty much decoupled from its output. Well, not pretty much. It is decoupled from its output. So what's powering the HAX tag, which is ultimately where the integrations come from, is it's a vanilla web component. And so it's called HAX. And that vanilla web component, when I say vanilla, it's just HTML element. The only thing that is dependent upon from a UI visual standpoint, and I could be wrong, and we'll obviously accept contributions to improve this or whatever, is the store. So the store is effectively all non-visual, making sure that that body of data is managed, that we are aware of multiple tags on the page. It has voice command stuff. It goes and brokers where the App Store definition comes from, which is what tells it how to work. It loads in the slot that the store doesn't do jack. So what's doing all the visual side is it's dynamically importing all the dependencies. So the different pieces of the HAX UI are all broken out into individual tags that communicate with the store to make sure that everything's in sync. So whether it's that export dialog or the little map or the tray, which is the entire flyout, all of that then cascades into other things, right? So like our tray leverages Nikki's alley collapse. It's written lit element. It's got a bunch of icons and all that other stuff, but it is basically decoupled from the rest of it because there's other things that can integrate the underlying tags. So like that HAX tag is separate from the actual HAX body repo, and the HAX body repo has all the pieces of this, skeletal structure, if you will. So we don't have any connotation right now of like I shouldn't say right now. We have no intention of doing like I want to bootstraps theme this. Like it's going to be more, these are their own individual components. Now, Nikki has provided some very interesting things in some other episodes around overloading the render function of elements that already exist. And effectively keeping the definition, but just hijacking the way that they render through subclasses. We're always looking to improve the HAX UI. I don't know if you saw it a year ago, Greg, or 2 years ago. I mean,
I saw it 2 years ago. I haven't seen it. I don't think I've seen it in a year, but 2 years ago, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, well, we presented at a conference.
Yeah.
Garbage 2 years ago. So it's at least getting better, and it's getting better all the time. And from our perspective, it doesn't entirely matter what it looks like because the output is still HTML. So our initial focus was on making sure that that output and that schema was stable so that we wouldn't care what the editor was. And now as we've started to get into more UX audits, as we've had contributions from National Archives, some student groups, we're starting to get a larger user base of people using this and giving us feedback associated with it. So, I mean, if you have a client that is would be interested in this, and this becomes a vehicle for contribution, it can basically go wherever the community ends up driving it.
Cool.
I hope that's slightly helpful. Give a ton of contributions, give a ton of contributions, give a ton of contributions. That's the way that works, right?
Yeah, contribute. Got it.
Fantastic. Contributions. So now I will say, completely agnostic to that, Greg, what Mike and Nikki and I's sales pitch, if you will, quote unquote, at conferences over the last several years has not necessarily been HAX. It's been adopt web components. And here's the way to adopt web components. Because I think we're on a continuum that if we can get other people onto the web components pipeline, they will run into what we're doing at some point. So I think one of the biggest sells for National Archives was, hey, you can use this same workflow that you used to use for building websites. You can use it for building the individual bricks of your theme and your design layer. And then if you want to repurpose any of those to authoring, you just add this schema to it. So the schema being an add-on to existing visual assets, I think is massively appealing. And even just adopting a workflow where you have bricks that work across Angular and React and Vue and in Drupal projects and WordPress and whatever, it's a better long-term positioning, I think, for an industry standpoint.
Yeah, that's kind of how the conversation came up, was web components are happening, is from my understanding. And then as that's coming down, we're like, okay, well, how do we do editing experience to allow them to use web components, right? Because you can't use web components in Layout Builder. And that was kind of the biggest hiccup, was you can't really, I mean, there's hacky ways to do it, but you can't really use them in Layout Builder. Okay, so what's the next step? Well, Gutenberg. Well, that doesn't work because of how they save things, and then it's so limited to how it works. Well, we want to go and use essentially WC Factory to go in, build essentially these giant libraries for clients to go in and build out, you know, sites for them. And then, hey, oh, well, you have a Drupal site, great. You have a WordPress site, great. You know, you have, oh, you want a React app, great. You want a mobile app, cool. You do all of these things for you. That's kind of the span of where we're going with this and why web components are kind of becoming a thing.
Yeah, so in the past we've talked about having a way to completely override the HAX editing experience for a component. I think it was a component that was so complex that you had to customize it, and I forget, maybe it was the RCoder one.
It was either RCoder, H5P, and just
Table editor.
Data tables have come up with that.
So the paradigm that we were talking about was, okay, we have the core way that HAX schema is styled, right? But we put a trapdoor in to an escape hatch to say, okay, but you can override that. You can completely override this. So we have been talking about that. Also, the new, you know, browser standards that are coming out that will in the future give us ways to just completely override web components wherever we want. I forget what the proposal is.
It's not scoped custom element registries.
No, it's a way for you to jump in and totally override the definition of an import.
Oh, import maps.
Yeah, right. So import maps would be a way where what you could do is say, okay, well, I want to jump in and I want to change the way that the HAX tray is styled. I want to change the way that the text input fields are styled. So each one of those is its own web component. And what you can do to customize web components is you can extend from the base class of, let's say, HAX tray, add your own flavor, override the render function completely change the way that the output is, and then just start, you know, using those tags. So that could be a way in the future that we start recommending to completely, you know, change the UI of HAX.
I think that's kind of the dream, right? To go and be able to customize this for a client on that side of it. But at the same time, yeah, there are, you know, ways we can contribute back and try to figure out, make it a little better than it is currently. And then maybe not need as many of those things. Maybe just use colors, right? Or like something silly, just like branded for the client.
Right.
But,
right.
So it's good to know that's on the horizon.
Yeah, we've been playing around with, there's still a need for a rich text editor region for HAX. And I've been playing around with a component called rich text editor that uses this paradigm, and Brian referenced it, where, you know, maybe in the same way that CK, you can add your plugins and customize your styles and override stuff. Basically, any of the components and any of the buttons can be extended. So we have like dummy buttons that get extended. You can define how they behave. You can override the render functions. And so it'll have a layer of that like complete functionality. You know, you could break it at any point and you know, make it your own.
This could also, and I don't know because I've honestly not understood why they do this, but OpenWC in their tooling for their boilerplate repos, they have an entry point that literally just imports the definition and then does window.customelements.define. And that file is separate from the actual definition of the element. Now, our tooling generates those as one thing because our target has always been web. However, it wouldn't be that difficult to, you know, separate all the window.customelement.defines from their class-based structure. With a gain then being, oh, well, you want to rewrite what the definition of HAX body is? for, you know, visual purposes, or you want to rewrite the CSS that goes into the tray, okay, well, you can rewrite what the input definition is prior to it being defined, because the window.customelements.define could say, oh, well, by the way, HAX tray now gets this definition from, you know, the Greg element or whatever class. So maybe that would be a reason why we should abstract those two things. I've never actually had a reason that said like, oh, maybe that'd be neat if we abstracted them, but like this would.
I would
Yep.
personally love
Yep.
it if you abstracted them, as somebody who every now and then has to go in and figure out what's going on. That would be lovely.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of why you'd want to split those out. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before either.
I like, lately I've been trying to split things out to the behaviors as its own component, and then, you know, the specific rendering extends that behavior. So here are the properties, the basic schema that I'm working with, and then maybe I have render templates that can be overridden, but ultimately, like, to me, behaviors are, this is the functionality of what this thing does, this is the structure, and everything else is how I paint it or extend it.
That radio behaviors thing that you worked on that I know you're not going to show.
I know, I won't have
awesome.
time.
Yeah. All right.
But I'll have
so-
examples by next week, and then you can see how, like, why I woke up at 2 a.m. and did coding in my head and then just had to type it out because it's a game changer.
So
I couldn't go back to sleep. This is so awesome.
So transitioning to, but from what we were wrapping up about to what Nikki is going to show with forms. One of the biggest aspects of HAX is how it's able to still treat the DOM like data is it's leveraging properties and the web components you make effectively as a data API. So it's treating it and saying, oh, it's not a meme maker tag that's a bunch of gobbledygook in the DOM. It's an actual tag that has properties, and when those properties are set, the data is reactive and it updates the corresponding things in the element. So the definition, as part of having to make this definition, this thing called HAX schema we've been talking about, is that the element implements something called static get HAX properties. And static get HAX properties has to return a data structure that looks effectively like this. As far as what the API is, can it scale, right? Gizmo is how it shows up in the UI. Settings is these groups that you end up seeing, particularly configure and advanced. As Alice mentioned, some confusion around their placement. So the meme maker or any of these tag, the video player, let's say in the configure block, it has this little piece, which is more or less what we call HAX schema. So this is an abstraction of JSON schema. JSON schema allows you to say, this isn't just a value, this is how we express the value and how, what the data type of this value is. And there was an interesting project we found called EcoJSON schema that basically extended that and said, oh, and by the way, here's how you would represent that data as a form element. So we took that concept and kind of boiled it and tried to simplify it a bit. So to build reading through this is saying, we can build a form on the front end that says, hey, the title is a citation, it's a text field, put this as its description. If you need an icon, show the text format thing, it's required for this component to exist. And whatever you do with the value, I want you to set it to the property called citation on this element. So that little tiny concept, we're able to scale up massively across all of our elements. And that's how the forms end up getting generated on the front end. So with that in mind, I want Nikki to show that those forms generated on the front end have literally nothing to do with HAX. HAX just happens to benefit from this awesome thing that she's worked on. And you're muted. It's like I did all that setup work. Like, what was the point? Why am
and then I muted.
Why do I do the setup work? I don't even know.
I don't know either. All right. I'm going to switch to my desktop over here. Okay, so I've shown this a few times before, and basically it's the piece that generates HAX forms on the fly. You can see the different field types that are available, the tabs, the ability to to do an array of items that have multiple fields in them, date picker and whatnot. There we go. And it really can just boil down to, you know, a single tag, and then you can set a JSON file for the data that generates the form on the fly. Let me show you the code here in demo. Oh, that's the wrong demo. The simple fields. Okay, so if we go into the form demo, what's going on here is I have endpoints that are loading the field data. And that's entry fields.json, which is right here. This is the schema that HAX is. This is the schema that HAX is using, and all it's doing in the form is there we go. I just point to which one that is, and it's going to load everything for me, and then I can get the data back out. Now, what's interesting about this is I've done that scaffolding approach where I split everything up. So there is a form if you need to use the entire form. There's a lighter version of the form that uses the standard JSON schema as opposed to our HAX schema. So if you didn't want all of our HAX schema stuff, there's a form light version. And that looks pretty much the same. So there's form. Load data. And then show values. This is
So,
form.
Nikki,
Right? Yeah. Go ahead.
what doesn't it? So it doesn't include the HAX schema in the output in the data whenever you go to get the data.
So I've got two versions of this. There's a light version that's just using JSON schema, so that if you don't buy in, this is a good example of if you don't buy into the way we're doing things and you just want to use a standard way, the light version of the form and the light version of schema is actually just using the original JSON schema spec and not pulling in anything that we customized. But what I've done is I basically take those base classes like light and I use them to extend with our customizations. So if I go to simple fields JS, it's actually, there's simple fields light. I'm extending it so that I get all of this stuff from simple fields light, and then just adding, I'm adding some conversion of our schema to the JSON schema, and then just leveraging everything I already did in the light version. And so that's how I'm able to have it use both. There's basically the part that renders all the fields without a form tag in case you want to mix it with other form elements. And then there's the one that's the form tag itself. So simple fields JS is all of our, it's just rendering fields, but if you do field form, it's actually going to build out simple fields in that form tag. So I've basically decided that I was going to extend the shit out of things and take it to, all right, the simplest, most standardized version of it is just that simple fields light and simple fields. And then, built on top of that. And the same goes for the individual form fields. So I have this blank simple fields container. If you wanted to just use the native HTML fields, it's going to wrap the everything in a simple fields container, and then you can use a regular input, HTML checkbox. Anything that you wrap in that will then know how to interact with the simple fields piece. But then on top of that, I extended the container to say, all right, what if I want to make a custom component field? And so this is sort of the boilerplate component field. I have field set, if you wanted to make a field set, but really tabs are just an extension of the field set. So I'm extending all of the behaviors from simple field set to be able to, to be able to make my own types of tabs. If you wanted something that's different from a tab interface, you could extend tabs or you could extend field set and create your own custom form field. And in fact, one of them that's not in here right now is Brian's card selector. But if we wanted to make a simple card selector that was part of this library, I could do it. Or right now it lives outside of simple fields. And all we have to do to decide, where's the conversion? All we have to do to decide to add an extra component is there's a level of definitions that are JSON in the conversion that say, all right, when you see this data type, this is your conversion. I'm going to go up to the HAX piece.
I would love to know how the cards thing actually works. I mean, you implemented it, and I went, wow, this is awesome looking. I don't understand what's going on.
Let me see, because I haven't touched this stuff in a couple of weeks, so let me get my bearings here. So within HAX wiring now, there should be a conversion for simple fields. So our HAX wiring is taking simple fields even a step further and doing things specific to our HAX instance. That's the HAX properties. I should have a conversion file in here. This standard advanced properties. Oops. Oh, there's the JSON schema. I know I have conversion here somewhere. Here it is in the different file. So there's a file called HAX fields.js that takes basically the HAX schema and says, all right, well, when HAX has something that's the format simple fields, this is the component that we're going to turn it into. So for alt tags, here's how we're going to convert it. Here's the card one. Date picker field set file upload entity block. Picker.
And this is an example of how to add a new field type.
Yeah, so if you wanted to add a new field type and say everything of this field type is going to use this component, it's basically saying this is the thing that you build, these are the attributes you set to it. Gotcha. This is what it handles. So if it's a date time, we're just going to use simple fields field, and here are the attributes for it. The wrap is basically that container. So if it's something that doesn't have the container behaviors, then it ends up being wrapped in a container so that the container can monitor it. Icon picker, it says, all right, if you come across an icon picker, make it simple icon picker. So the simple fields, you could actually extend it and create your own definitions. Here's the card one. Let me search on card. There. So if you have something called card list, it says make it into a card list. And so that's the way I've been building things out, is the idea that I have these base sets of behaviors, but you can always extend that with JSON and make your own definitions.
Which, if we had that JSON in an abstracted file, we can start to do the back-end validation while rendering on the front end using the same file, which I know Potter will be super happy when we move to a much more Node.js based world where we have these front end definitions, but this same class structure can be used for back-end validation.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you're talking about going like microservices approach, this could be like this silver bullet. This approach, like, so you have the identical structure that's not only giving all the front end assets, like, hey, this is how you should render yourself. This is how you should edit yourself. It's also providing information for the back end of this is how you should store the data coming over the wire from this web component. It's crazy.
Yeah, Nikki, do you think there's a way, you hate when I start things this way. So
Are you going to push me off a cliff?
so HAX has this magic way of learning on the fly what its definitions are so it can build the forms.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that, let's say Potter put on the page a simple -fields-form tag, and then in that tag he put first name, last name as just basic text fields, and then the third thing he put is an R-coder field. And if the R-coder field implemented a certain callback function, that as it was rendering the form, it would actually siphon the definition off of R-coder on the fly as far as how to properly save and handle that data. Does that make any sense?
So based on which thing you pick, something else gets selected in the form fields. I do have if then logic in here, but I haven't used it much. And
Well, so less the conditionals and more like,
okay.
Let's say we're trying to cut an XAPI statement.
Mm-hmm.
And Potter has a page that just has some random fields in it, right? It has an R-coder field.
Mm-hmm.
If the R-coder tag could actually inform the form that it's sitting in, right? Let's imagine it's in a form, that it could inform the form, hey, my value statement, when you ask for the value, should come from this callback function, or this endpoint, or this property on.
Didn't we do that in card list?
Did, but
Oh,
I think you manually defined card list, right? Is there
I
something?
defined card list, but there's a paradigm where in card lists, where when you change what your CDN is, it's regenerating the form based on what's in that CDN. So it's the same idea. You don't know what the fields are until you make a selection, which is really it's an if this, add these fields, or regenerate all the fields in this area. What was the element that was in? I'm seriously having old lady brain today.
It's under product card. It's a dumb repo name because it started as something else.
Because we need to eventually we got to break that out and figure out, is it a thing that everybody can use, and whether or not we abstract.
Well, most of it is. It's just it happens to have this crazy list of cards in it. It's under lib.
Yeah. I'd like to break these out into very generic, customizable, and then have the HAX specific elements of it be extended. So HAX element card list. I'm trying to remember where that is in here, so bear with me. So product card.
I mean, while she's looking for that, what I think about is the classic like contact form service. So, Greg, we're trying to, at least me at my unit is trying to go all static site, right? And how we're replacing Drupal functionality is with tiny microservices in the form of these little Node.js apps. So the classic one is, okay, well, how do you do contact forms on a static site, right? And optimally, you would go to this service that handles your forms. You would create a form through a UI, like Form Monkey or whatever that service is. And then you would be able to place that form on your site with a web component, right? So the simple fields would be, the simple fields UI would be on the contact form service, right? And I'm talking out loud, trying to tie all these together in my head. So with the point and click UI, you're building out your outlines, JSON outline schema, right? Which is the data structure for this contact form. Whenever you go back to your website to place this contact form on, you enter into HAX edit mode, And HAX edit mode knows about your contact service. So it lists it, you see that new web form that you just created in your service. And using HAX, you click it and it places a little web component on your page that renders the form. And it's rendering the form by headlessly hitting your content service, asking for that JSON outline schema. So it knows the exact form that it should render. Right? Does that all sound, Brian, Nikki, does that sound right to you?
I was looking at code.
Okay.
Sorry. Trying
Yes.
to remember.
We got
In theory, that sounds right.
Yeah. But
we're trying to put all of Drupal on the front end. Yeah.
right. Well, but that's the thing is that that could be all in the front end too. That web component could have the JSON outlet schema, and the contact service could have no idea what the structure is. It just knows that it's going to receive a blob of data, a blob of structured data that it needs to save.
Are you running those like true node services, or are you running like a Lambda function?
That's a good question too. Like it could be, like I'm running a true node service, but we want to go more functions as a service, less, less state. Of course, it's got to be saved somewhere, but well, I guess, yeah. So if it's a functions as a service, then it's just in charge of receiving this API call from the web component sitting on the front end and storing it in some type of database.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like a lot of effort for to spin up a whole node service just for that, just for forms.
Well, I mean, it sounds more difficult, but actually in practice, once the service is built, to wire it to your site is really just editing some YAML, is what we're finding. Which is that's the promise of web components, right?
Yeah.
That you don't have to spin up and, more importantly, maintain an entire Drupal site every time you want a one-pager with a contact form.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're going that direction as well for like static sites and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because we're realizing Drupal may not be the fit for everything.
What?
Never.
Blasphemy.
I don't know. I have enjoyed 11D after hating it for 2 weeks. So.
Feel like
Learning
I can't
curve
remember.
of 2 weeks.
I'm gonna have to take a look at this and get back to you next week on it. But I know I solved that problem with the card list in that it will auto generate additional fields based on something that you've selected. I think there's a level of, because of the way I abstracted this, because there's form and then there's just the schema itself, you could just put the fields themselves. There's a level of, you can create the form and then have it dynamically generate a collection of fields by new JSON. So it's like an object that says, it's basically nesting another simple fields object within your simple fields form. So it's a field with more simple fields, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's component. It's components that has to be like
I
that.
can't remember.
It's an infinite loop of
Infinite loop.
recursive loop of web.
I'll have to remember where that is, but I do know I had created a data type that allows you to do that. It's basically, here's a set of additional fields. Give me a schema. And so then you're just piping that new schema into that new set of fields. And that field is basically an object, because one of the field types here field set is an object, and really simple fields is just another field set. And then there's a bunch of, any field within it is going to fire its own custom event, which was in here somewhere. Where does that live? Here. So if you take the entire path to that particular field, you can find it and do on value changed and do anything you want with that particular field that's within it, that's auto-generated. So you can listen for a change in one of those fields and then repopulate the value or repopulate the schema, and then it'll build that piece out, that sub-schema. Which is how I was able to get it. But I know that problem is solved. I just have to dig up where I had an example of that. But that last round of simple fields edits, there was some ability to just sort of, you know, have fields that are dependent upon other fields or only show when other fields exist.
For next time, then.
Yeah.
Although next time you need to show the radio, what's it called, radio figure or something?
The radio behaviors.
Yeah.
And Alice inspired me. I might have one called image behaviors because of Alice from what she did this week, which would be just taking what we have related to licensing and the long description ability and putting them into one thing so that anything I have that uses images doesn't have to recreate those fields again.
Ooh, I like it.
Yes. See, so the ID whisperer can also be a Nikki whisperer.
And the radio behaviors thing would be a good example of roping into this simple fields context, at least from the demos I've shown. I know I'm, you know, spoiling it for next week, but I saw Nikki be able to make a selectable list of images that's going to return which image is active based on basically just wrapping whatever you feel like.
And basically, what I'll be able to do is I can take out all that logic from tabs and just have tabs use that, have my carousel use it, because it's extensible and it's a behavior just to manage the parent and children.
Just the radio aspect. So look forward for that next time. You're on deck for next week already, Nikki. This is a verbal contract. You have to follow through because it'll be the second episode 14 that we have in a row. And with that, we're done with episode 14. It's actually 13.
13.
We don't say 13. I mean, because the darkness over my shoulder may come down the hallway and consume me. But with that, if you ever want to get on today's show, thank you everybody for participating. Thank you, Greg, for asking questions and joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Anybody is always welcome to join us. We record these 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Fridays. We literally make up the schedule in the first about 15 minutes or so. So to get on this call, which is later than put on the YouTube. So to get on the YouTube, because I know it's hard to be on YouTube, you need to go to bit.ly/HAX Slack. And that'll get you into our Slack channel, and then we can give you the username and password to get into this thing so we don't get Zoom bombed. But with that, next week is Apereo. So by the time this is actually recorded and posted, Apereo will be over. But next week, at least several of us will be participating in HAX Camp Apereo, which unfortunately has to be online for obvious reasons. But we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.